is Daf Chaf Gimel of Maseches Megillah. We're going to start on 22b, around 6 lines from the bottom. So it says the Gemara Tana Rabbanan Kida. Kida, this is where a person falls on their face and only their face is touching the ground, but the rest of their body is in the air. That is alapayim. That's on the ground. As it states, Vatikot Batsheva Apayim Eretz. That Batsheva bowed down on the ground. So Kida refers to the face being on the ground. When it says Kriya, Kriya refers to bowing down al berkayim on one's knees. As it states, Michroa al berkav. So it refers to Shlomo HaMelech. When Shlomo HaMelech bowed down at the Chanukah Zabayitz, he bowed down on his knees. Hishtachava, when it says the word hishtachava, this refers to pishut yadayim v'raglayim. This refers to stretching out one's hands and legs and completely bowing down. As it states, Havo navo ani v'imcha v'achacho hishtachavot l'cha arza. That it states that Yaakov Avinu said to Yosef, "Am I and your mother and your brother is going to come and bow down to you on the ground." Levi ache kida kame de Rebbe. The Itla. Levi demonstrated what Kida was in front of Rebbe, and as a result of this, he became Itla. Itla means he was like paralyzed, or he got wounded, he was unable to walk properly. So because this Kida is a dangerous maneuver, you're sticking your face on the ground and your body's in the air, so therefore it was considered to be a dangerous maneuver, and he became unable to walk. So the Gemara says, "V'haka garmale," was that what caused him to become injured? But a person should never cast aspersions against heaven, God forbid. There was once a person who was a great man who threw his words up towards heaven. The Itla. And as a result of this, he became wounded. Manu, who is this? Levi. So we see from here, Levi was wounded not because he did the Kida, but because he cast his aspersions up to heaven. So the Gemara says, Hava Hagarmala. Yeah, he was caused by both things. Both things did this to him. One, that he did Kida, and he did it in a manner that was physically dangerous. And secondly, was the fact that he cast aspersions against heaven, and that caused him to become wounded. Rav Rabin says, I saw Abaye and Rava that they used to pray on their sides. When they did the Tachanun, they didn't actually fall down on their face, they didn't bow down on their knees, they didn't spread out, and they didn't do Kida, but they went on their sides, that they leaned on their sides when they did this prayer, which today we call colloquially Tachanun, Nefilas Apayim. And the reason is because of the fact that Rashi says, a distinguished person is not permitted to fall on their face. So the Gemara says, on Yom Tov, we do 5, Yom Kippur, we do 6. On Yom Tov, 5 people get called to the Torah, Yom Kippur 6, and on Shabbos 7. That's what our Mishnah says. So Masnisin money, we're on the top of 23a. Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, 23a. So the Gemara says, Masnisin money. Who is our Mishnah like? Or Rabbi Yishmael or Rabbi Akiva? Our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yishmael, and our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Akiva. How do we know that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yishmael and it's not like Rabbi Akiva? The Tanya, we learned B'Yom Tov, Chamisha, B'Yom Kippurim, Shisha, Shabbos Shiva. The Brisa says, according to this opinion, Yom Tov is 5, Yom Kippur 6, Shabbos is 7. So far, it's consistent with our Mishnah. But then it says, Ein Pochasim Ahav Ein Mosifin Alehem Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That Rabbi Yishmael says that we're not allowed to do less than that number of aliyos, that's fine, but we're also not allowed to add on. We're not allowed to add on an extra aliyah. But our Mishnah says you can add on extra aliyah. So our Mishnah is not consistent with this position of Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Akiva says, B'Yom Tov Chamisha, B'Yom Kippurim Shiva, B'Shabbos Shisha. Rabbi Akiva has a position which is also not consistent with our Mishnah, because he says on Yom Tov is 5, Yom Kippur is 7, and on Shabbos is 6. That's also not consistent with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says Shabbos has 7 and Yom Kippur has 6. So it's inconsistent. So the Gemara says, but Rabbi Akiva continues, that you don't make less than these number of aliyot, but you can add on to them. So the Gemara says, money, who is the author of our Mishnah? Rabbi Yishmael, Kasha Tosevis. If you want to say our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yishmael, it's not, because our Mishnah says you could add on aliyot, our Mishnah says you can't. And Rabbi Akiva, Kasha Shisha. And if you want to say it's like Rabbi Akiva, it's a difficulty, because Rabbi Akiva says that on Shabbos you get 6 aliyos and Yom Kippur 7, and whereas our Mishnah says the opposite. Kasha Shisha v'Shiva. So Amar Rava Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel. So Rava says our Mishnah is consistent with an opinion that was taught in the Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel. Because what did the Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel teach us? But Yom Tov Chamisha. That on Yom Tov we get 5 aliyos. According to Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel, but Shisha b'Yom Kippurim Shisha b'Shabbos Shiva. Yom Kippur 6, and on Shabbos 7, which is exactly like our Mishnah. Ein pochasin mehen aval mosif and haim. We don't have less than this, but we do have more than this. That's the position of Rabbi Shmuel. So we see from here that Rabbi Shmuel, according to the Tana of Rabbi Shmuel, is exactly consistent with our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, yeah, but kasha the Rabbi Shmuel, but this is a big problem because it's a question against the other position of Rabbi Shmuel, because according to this position of Rabbi Shmuel, you're allowed to make hosaf, you're allowed to add on an aliyah, but according to the other Rabbi Shmuel, you're not allowed to add on. So the Gemara says, Trei Tanai aliba de Rabbi Shmuel. So there's 2 Tanaim who argue about what Rabbi Shmuel is saying, and that's what's going on here. 2 Tanaim have an argument as to what Rabbi Shmuel is teaching. So the Gemara now says, well, we have another brisa, who is the author of this following brisa? What does this brisa tell us? And Yom Tov, people came to shul late and they left early. Why did they come to shul late? They came to shul late because they were busy preparing the meal for Yom Tov. You're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, so they're busy preparing the meal. Now, that's Rashi says this is what was taught in Maseches Sofrim. Rashi cites Maseches Sofrim in chapter 18 of Maseches Sofrim. Mar Latzeis and Yom Tov, they leave early. Why? Because they have simple Yom Tov. They want to have a meal, a festive meal on Yom Tov. They want to enjoy their kigol, their whatever they eat on Yom Tov. So therefore, and on Yom Kippur, the next thing is on Yom Kippur, on Yom Kippur, everybody comes early and they leave late. This is going to be the source of the question. On Yom Kippur, we leave late, but according to our Mishnah, Yom Kippur only has 6 aliyos and Shabbos has 7. According to this source, Yom Kippur, you come early, you don't have to prepare any food, and you leave late, where you're not in a rush. Where are you going to go? You have nothing to eat at home. So, and then, B'Shabbos, on Shabbos, you come early because Rashi says you already prepared everything on Erev Shabbos. Friday afternoon is the mitzvah to have everything prepared by the time Shabbos starts. They have everything prepared. And so therefore you can come early on Shabbos morning to Lakros Shema Kavasikin, to recite Shema Kavasikin, Rashi says, like the earliest possible time you can, or you want to recite Shema with the sunrise. And so we see from here that on Shabbos you come early, but yet you want to leave quickly because you have Onik Shabbos. But anyway, we see from here the fundamental point is, who is this like? Maybe this price is like Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva says that on Yom Kippur, the Islay Gavra Yisera. Rabbi Akiva is the one who says that on Yom Kippur you have 7 aliyos, and on Shabbos you only have 6. And here we're saying on Yom Kippur you leave late, whereas on Shabbos you leave early. So maybe this price is like Rabbi Akiva. So we're saying, no, I feel with him, Rabbi Shmuel. We could even say this anonymous price is like Rabbi Shmuel. The Nafish Sidur the Yom, yeah, you only have 1 aliyah. Excuse me, yeah, you have an extra aliyah on Yom Kippur, but still, everybody would say that on Yom Kippur you have so many more prayers to say. The Nafish to do it is a big thing to arrange. It's a big machzor on Yom Kippur. So therefore, on Yom Kippur you read an extra aliyah, you go all the way, and so therefore, even though you have 1 less aliyah on Yom Kippur, according to Rabbi Shmuel, nevertheless you have more prayers, so you would leave late. So now the Gemara goes back to a question which Gemara kind of discussed earlier. The Gemara wants to know, where do we get these numbers that we read the Torah on every day? Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos Mincha we have 3 aliyos. And on Yom Tov we have 5 aliyos. And on Shabbos we have 7 aliyos. What's our source for this idea? So the Gemara says, Hani Shlosha Chamisha V'Sheva Keneged Mi. There's 3, there's 5, and there's 7. What does it correspond to? The Gemara says, I'll tell you what it corresponds to. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani and one who was with him arguing, Manu Rabbi Shimon Prazi. And some say it was Rabbi Shimon Bar Nachmani. Chad Amar, one say that what does it correspond to? Kineged Birkas Kohanim. There is a priestly blessing. What's a priestly blessing? We know that there are 3 psukim that the Kohanim bless the Am with. They bless the people with. And Yivarecha Hashem Yishmerecha. That's the first verse. It has 3 words in it. The second verse has 5 words in it. The third verse has 7 words in it. So therefore, the Birchos Kohanim, which has 3, 5, and 7, that corresponds to the number of aliyos that we get on a regular day, a Yom Tov day, and a Shabbos day. Obviously, what it's trying to tell us is that when we're doing the Birchos Kohanim, We know that the spirit of Hashem is coming down through the Kohanim and resting upon the people. So too, when we're hearing the Torah, we should try and think about this, that the spirit of Hashem, like it came down at Sinai, is coming, channeling through the holy words of the Torah and resting on the people. Whereas another opinion is that what does the 3 and the 5 and 7 correspond to? Asaf, Chamisha Meroa Pnei Melch, and Shiva Roa Pnei Melch. It corresponds to the 3, 5, and 7. These are the watchers of the king. The Shlosh Shomrei Asaf, the 3 people whose job was to, like, kind of the king's court. There was 3 and 5 and 7 who are the members of the king's court. Rashi says, what's the source for this? It says Shiva Sarei Parasu Madai. In the Megillah, it talks about in Megillah Esther, the 9. In chapter 9, it says, in chapter 1 of Esther, verse 14, it says the 7 Sarei Parasu Madai. And of these 7, there were 5 who were even more distinguished. And those are the ones who are written in the end of the book of Malachim. And then, in addition to that, there were Shloshei Shomer Asaf. There are the 3 Shomer Asaf, which are also written about in Malachim. And so therefore, corresponding to this, we will establish the Aliyah. So we see that the Torah reading is Ke'in Malchus. It's like a type of royalty. When we're reading the Torah, it's like royalty. And Tony Rav Yosef, indeed Rav Yosef taught Gimel, Chamisha, V'Shiva. What are 3, 5, and 7 correspond to? The Shlosh Shomer Asaf, Chamisha Meroa Melch, and the Shiva Roa Melch. It corresponds to exactly this thing. The 3 who watched the king, the 5 and the 7 who watched the king. So says the Gemara. When Rabbi Yosef said this, Abai says to his Rabbi Yosef, my time Mar. Why did you never tell us this before? You never taught us this. So he says to him, he said, I didn't know you needed it. Did you ever ask me anything which I didn't tell you? Of course I would tell you everything. So that's why I didn't tell you, because you never asked me a question. Yaakov Mina or Rabbi Yehuda. So Yaakov Mina literally can mean like a heretic, a min. So therefore, Tosfos changes. It's not Yaakov Mina, because we don't give people a bad name, Chas v'Shalom. So he's changed to Yaakov Mitzah. So Tosfos says Yaakov Mitzah. Ask the question to Rabbi Yehuda, Hani Shisha the Yom Kippurim Keneged me. Okay, so we know what 3, 5, and 7 correspond to. But what about the 6 and Yom Kippur? What does that correspond to? Amalei Keneged. There were 6 who stood on the right of Ezra when Ezra stood on the tower and read the Torah, and there were 6 who stood on his left and when he read the Torah. So therefore, that's why we have 6 aliyos in Yom Kippur. Shenemar vayamod Ezra sofer migdal eitz asher asu v'davar vayamod etzlo matisya v'shema v'aniya v'uriya v'chalkiya u'maasya ayimino. All of these stood on his right side, and on his left side, who was standing there on his left side? On his left side was Mismolo Pedayo, Mishael, Malkia, V'Chashem, V'Chashbadana, V'Zechariah, Meshulam. And so those were on his left side. Someone says, wait 1 second. On his left side, I don't count 6, we count 7. Hani Shiva. These are not 6, these are 7. Where it says, yeah, Ainu Zechariah, Ainu Meshulam. It's not a question. Zechariah is really the same person as Meshulam. So why I might call him Meshulam? So why do they call him Meshulam here? To Mishlam Bovade, because he was Tamim, he was complete in his deeds, he was complete in his actions, and therefore we call him Meshulam. So we say this is the cause of the day. Everybody can get an aliyah, even a katan, even a minor, even a woman. So from the perspective of the letter of the law, a woman is allowed to receive a Torah, an aliyah, from the perspective of the divine laws. But the Chachamim said it's not appropriate. Isha lo tikra b'Torah. They said a woman should not be called to the Torah when they kavod tzibur, because of honor for the community. Presumably, the expectation would be that a man would read the Torah, and if there that in those days when a person got an aliyah, everybody didn't just get called to the Torah and say the blessing, that they came to the Torah and they read the Torah. So if that means that if they're calling a woman to the Torah, it means that they didn't have a man to do it. So this would be considered like though all the men are ignorant. And so therefore, the Chacham said it's not honorable for the community for the woman to get the aliyah. So that's the Gemara maftir. If a person has the person who does the maftir in those days, they would also read the Haftorah. The origins of this practice are obscure, but the person who gets the Haftorah, because we're going to see in a moment that that rabbis didn't want to just call up this person to read the prophets, they also called him up to read the Torah. That's called the maftir. So maftir, can he count as one of the 7 aliyos? One says he counts, the other one says he doesn't count. The one who says he counts as one of the 7, he's actually in the end of the day reading from the Torah. The one who says he doesn't count, the Amar Ula, why is the one who does the Haftorah and the prophets, why does he need to read the Torah first? And they cover Torah because we want to give honor to the Torah, because otherwise it's disrespectful and he's just reading from the prophets and not reading from the Torah. And so therefore, so since it's only been called up because of Kavod Torah, therefore we're not going to count him as part of this 7. Gemara challenges this. That the one who does Haftorah will yifos. You have to read a minimum of 21 verses. Why? Where do we get Keneged Shiva? 3 verses corresponding 1 to each aliyah. 7 times 3 is 21. So Keneged Shiva Shakar B'Torah. And if it's the case that the maftir would be counting, it would be Ezrim V'Arbaya Havian. It would be 24. And so therefore, since it's the case, if it will be the case that he's not counting as part of it, Rashi says, and we have 8 who are being called to the Torah, and we require 24. So from the fact that he's being counted from the fact that we have 21, must be that the maftir is counted as one of the 7. Mara said, no, even the Shemukava Torah, since the only reason why he's being called to the Torah is because of Kavod Torah, but not because he's not really counted. We also don't need 3 verses corresponding to it. Says the Gemara on top of 23b. So the Gemara challenges a point that was made in this brisa, because the brisa said that there's has to be a minimum of 21 verses read. So Rabba challenges this. Is it really the case that we always have to have 21 verses? What about the Haftorah for Parshas Sav? It says in Jeremiah, chapter 7, we're supposed to read the Haftorah of Olisechem Sifu. The law of Yan Esher V'Echad. There are not 21 verses there. Vikarinan, and nevertheless, we still read this as the Haftorah. So the says, no, Shani Hasam the Salak Inyan. No, that case is different, because there we finished it. We finished the topic in less than the 21 verses. And so therefore, we don't need to start a new topic in order to say we need at least 21 verses. Well, you mean to say that if the topic is not over, you only read 20, you have to read a minimum of 21 verses. I used to daven with Rabbi Yochanan, and I was to go to Rabbi Yochanan many times. And once we read 10 verses, he said, stop reading, you're done. So the Gemara says, yeah, that's because it's different, because Rabbi Yochanan's time, they had something which we don't have anymore today. That was called the Meturgaman. They had somebody, they read one verse, they translate that verse right away. So it take a whole long process. It was a whole to do. And so Makam Sheish Turgaman Shani, because it was a whole to do, there was a Turgaman, so that place is different. What is the Meturgaman? He translates it. Rashi says, it's a big tircha to the tzibur. It's a big hassle. Everybody's waiting. They want to go home. They want to eat the chalent already. And so therefore, we didn't require them. Rabbi Yochanan said just do 10 verses because we're reading them in Turgaman. There's no difference in a place where there's no Meturgaman. But if that, you have to do the first 20. When did we learn this? When did we learn this? Then only when there's no Meturgaman, when there's nobody translating. So then you have to read 21 verses, unless the matter stops in the middle. But if there is a Meturgaman, then posek, you stop earlier, and Rabbi Yochanan used to stop them at 10 verses. Says the Mishnah, in Porsin al Shema. So the Mishnah says you're not Poris al Shema. What is Poris al Shema? Rashi tells Poris means like to break a piece of bread in half, or to cut something in half, like pros. So in Porsin al Shema, Rashi says that let's say a million came to the synagogue, they already missed the davening. Everybody read the Shema together. So, but they want to say stuff together. So one person stands up and he says, Kadesh Ubarchu, and the first blessing of Shema, and that's called portion, half of the matter. So this thing you require a million. Mishnah is going to list those things which require 10, a minion of 10 for. The ain't over you can't have a chazan. You don't do the Birkas Kohanim. They Koran b'Torah and you don't read the Torah. They maftir and benavi and you don't do the Haftorah. They maftir and benavi you don't do the Haftorah. They osin mamid umoshav. And what they used to do is when they would bring out the aron with the mace, when they bring out the dead body and they would be carrying it, they would make 7 stops. And each time they would sit down and they would cry and then they would stand up. You only do those 7 stops of sitting and standing when you have a minion. And you don't do the blessing for the mourners. And the comforting of the mourners. The Birchas Avelim, Rashi is going to tell us, he says a bracha to the comfort, to those who are comforting him, and they say a blessing to the mourners. So you don't do that unless you have a minion. Uberchas chatanim. This is the blessing of the groom, the blessing for a wedding. You need a minion for that. And you don't include God's name Elokenu as part of the zimun, as part of the Birkat Hamazon. Pachos miasar, unless you have a minion of 10. Ubekarkos tisha v'kohen. And let's say you sanctify real estate, you sanctify land, and now you want to redeem that and give the value to the temple. How do you evaluate the money? You need 10. 9 are regular people, and 1 is the Kohen. And so too a person. The Gemara is going to explain what that means. First, the Gemara says, what's our source for the concept that we need a minion minon? And merely, what's our source for the concept that we need 10 for a minion? It says in the verse, Hashem, it says, you're not allowed to desecrate my name. I must be sanctified, God says. So what does that mean? What does it mean when you want to sanctify God's name with the davar shebekdusha? We want to say something that's holy. We require 10. That's how we know we need a minion. So my mashma, so where it says, how do we know we need 10 from there? That just means you need for kedusha, but how do you know 10? So Gemara says the Tana Rebbe Chia taught Asya Tov. It says the word v'nikdashti besoch b'nei Yisrael, within the midst of b'nei Yisrael, and we also have the word besoch appearing by Korach. Hashem says, separate yourself from this Eidah. So we compare the sanctification of God's name, where it says the word besoch, to Korach, where it says separate besoch from this Eidah, the Asya Eidah, and we make a double Xereshon. Now we take the word Eidah and we compare it, Asya Eidah, and we compare it to the other place where the word Eidah, congregation, appears. Until how long will this wicked Eidah do this? That was by the Meraglim, by the sin of the spies. How many spies were there? 12. But we get rid of Joshua and Caleb from this count because Joshua and Caleb were tzaddikim. And so therefore, when it says Eidah Razos, that's referring to 10 spies. There's 10 spies. Yes. So we see from here the source for a minion comes from Eidah Hara'ah. So if you need an Eidah for bad, when we make a minion, where every time the Yidden gather together to make a minion, we're undoing the sin of the Meraglim. The Meraglim had 10, but they were the Eidah Hara'ah. So we're the Eidah. We're the Eidah that's good. They were the wicked Eidah. So when we gather together for a minion and daven and learn Torah together, we are undoing the wickedness of the spies.
And we learned last night the Ra'ah that Paro saw in his vision about this Eidah Ra'ah, right? I think.
Okay, we'll check that afterwards. Yes, we'll check that afterwards. No, we'll check that afterwards. Shkoyach. So what happens now? We're in the middle of it. It says, we don't do the stopping or the sitting with less than a minion. So why do we need a minion when we stop 7 times for the mourners? So the Gemara explains, keeping the Baal Meimar Imdu Yikarim Amodu, since they want to say stand up, precious one, stand up, Shvu Yikvarim Shvu, sit down, precious one, sit. With less than 10, it's not appropriate to do that because you can't have the pomp and circumstances with less than 10. We don't say the blessing for the mourners and the blessing for the grooms less than 10. What's the blessing of the mourners? The Talmud says the blessing in the street. So Rashi explains what's going on here. Rashi says Sharehu Omer Bracha Menachmim. The mourner says a blessing to those comforting him on his own. He says, what's the blessing? He says, Achenu Ba'a Gmul Yishayim Lachem Gmulchem Atov. Baruch Atah Hashem Yishayim Gmul. And God paid back you because you're comforting me. Like God pay you for good. And to the mourners, they're blessed. They say, the people say to the mourners, that God comfort the mourners. The blessing of the mourners is with 10. And the mourners don't make up the minyan because they have a different blessing than the ones who are comforting them. A wedding is in 10 with 10. And the chassan counts as part of the 10. We don't make Birkas Hamazon using God's name when we do a zimun unless you have a minyan of 10. Why? Since we're going to say God's name less than 10, it's not appropriate. And when we evaluate the real estate, we use 9. The Kohen and the Kohen and the people make up our included within that. There's 9 regular men and 1 Kohen, and that makes up the 10. Not immediately, what's the source? In the paragraph about evaluating and redeeming the hektish, the word Kohen appears 10 times. So since the word Kohen appears 10 times, Rashi tells us 3 by erechin, 3 by an animal, and 4 by real estate. So since it appears 10 times, so we say Chal Gufei, Chal Mute. One is to tell us you need a Kohen, and one is to say Mute, to limit it in some manner. And whenever we have a limitation after limitation, in it's coming to add something. So it means Tisha Yisrael Machad Kohen. The first one tells us we need a Kohen, and the other 9 are telling us that we can use even a non-Kohen. So to Rabbis Tisha Yisrael Machad Kohen. So Gemara says, but Chamisha Yisrael. Why don't we say there's 5 Kohanim and 5 Yisrael? Each one limits, and the next one adds. And so therefore, maybe after we add, then the next one's telling us you need another Kohen. So Gemara says kasha. That's a difficulty. It's not a great difficulty, but it is a difficulty. But also Adam Kayotzeben. Also, when you redeem a person, you need 9 men and 1 Kohen to establish its value. So the Gemara says, first of all, Adam Bikodosh. You can't sanctify a person. A person cannot be sanctified to the temple. What are we talking about here? But I know a person says, I'm going to give my money to the temple. Since you're going to say, I'm going to give my money to the temple, not my money to the temple, the person is saying, I'm going to give the value of what I'm worth to the temple. A person says, I'm going to evaluate how much I'm worth, and I'm going to give my money to the temple. That's what it means. Tanya Omer Dme'alai, Shaman Osoka evidence. The person says, Dme'alai, you look at this person as though, how much would they, if they hired themselves out as, or if they were sold as a servant, how much would they go for? And the servant is compared to real estate. So therefore, just like for real estate, you need 9 and a Kohen, so too for a servant, you need 9 and a Kohen. This is Koach. And I just want to say before we stop the recording, if people watch this on YouTube, then please subscribe so we can do this live on YouTube. And if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, we can do it live. So Rabbi Yossi